The woman looked down in horror to see a homeless man experiencing a terrifying scene. The man's skin and body had fused with the pavement. Rescue workers attempted to save him, but his legs had already turned into concrete, making separation impossible. Yet, this wasn't the most frightening part. As the woman scanned her surroundings, an eye emerged from the wall behind her. This is the 2025 Belgian Lovecraftian horror film Else, which scored an impressive 8.9 in its opening week and received 6 Cannes nominations, surpassing even the widely acclaimed Mr. K. The story begins with an emergency announcement. Inside a Brussels apartment, a designer named Anks worked busily at his computer as usual. While Anks was deep in design concepts, his community hotline rang abruptly. Learning of a contagious outbreak in his district, Anks immediately opened his computer. On the authorities' homepage, he discovered a CDC emergency bulletin just released. A strange virus was rapidly spreading across Europe. Once infected, victims developed bizarre, fleshy growths on their skin, accompanied by eerie cracks and bark-like textures. Reading online reports, Anks assumed it might be a skin disease. He called his girlfriend Cass, warning her to be cautious at her gathering. But just as Anks dialed Cass, the CDC updated their bulletin. This virus proved far more severe than anyone imagined. Seeing the update, Anks rushed to the bathroom. He removed his clothes, meticulously checking his body against the bulletin's symptoms. Only after confirming no growths or abnormalities did he relax. At that moment, his girlfriend's voice echoed from the doorway. Anks opened the door to find Cass seeking refuge with him. Cass's community had received a sudden lockdown order that morning. Residents were mandated to stay indoors with no exceptions. Hearing about a flu-like virus, Cass packed essentials and left before lockdown commenced. Anks wanted to check Cass for infection, but she embraced him tightly. 3 minutes later, a satisfied Cass headed to the bathroom to freshen up. Still concerned, Anks retrieved a magnifying glass. He examined Cass thoroughly, confirming no infection before his anxiety eased. Yet as they speculated about the virus's origin, ambulance sirens pierced the air below. Anks lifted the curtain to reveal workers examining a homeless man at the intersection. The man's lower body had merged completely with the sidewalk. A rescuer tried to free him, but his legs had fused with the pavement, rendering extraction impossible. After multiple failed attempts, workers erected barriers, leaving the unfortunate man to continue merging with the street. Witnessing this grotesque sight, Anks and Cass froze in disbelief upstairs. Little did they know, the true horror was only beginning. That evening, the CDC issued another urgent update. Scientists had determined this was no ordinary virus. Infection caused not only skin mutations, but physical transformations, merging victims with surrounding objects. Contact with stone during infection would turn a person into a literal stone figure. Watching the news report, Anks sensed something was terribly wrong. Early next morning, he raced to the supermarket below. He stockpiled massive supplies, then sealed every window and door with plastic sheeting. He disinfected their apartment meticulously. Kind-hearted Anks warned friends, but they dismissed the threat, continuing their revelry. Unbeknownst to the partygoers, the virus spread faster than scientists predicted. Within days, cases exploded globally, with France hit hardest, 98% of citizens infected. Nations activated emergency protocols, isolating citizens at home. Infected individuals were directed to designated zones, yet the disaster intensified relentlessly, even infecting medical responders. Watching news reports, Anks and Cass felt fortunate for their early preparations, but Anks didn't realize the true catastrophe was just unfolding. 2 days later, their apartment lost power. Anks called community services, but lines were constantly busy. Fortunately, Anks was a fitness enthusiast. He modified an exercise bike into a makeshift generator. Using the feeble electricity, Cass tried checking updates online, but the internet had failed. Frustrated, Cass noticed a small stone on the floor. Assuming it fell from the wall, she dismissed it. Yet as she removed it, another stone dropped. Sensing danger, Cass crouched for closer inspection and witnessed a nightmare.
Quoi?
Hearing Cass's scream, Anks rushed to the bedroom. He froze at the sight before him. Rubble piled beneath the desk, with something writhing within. Anks peered closer. Their neighbor had transformed into a mound of stones. The neighbor had frequently spied on Anks and Cass through a drilled peephole. Infected during voyeurism, he'd fused with the wall itself. As Anks considered pulling him free, the neighbor began expanding violently. Luckily, Anks reacted quickly and shielded Cass just before the neighbor exploded. But he was still injured by the flying debris. Seeing her boyfriend covered in blood, Cass was filled with panic. She moved Anks onto the bed, trying to help treat his wounds. But while removing embedded stones, she made a horrifying discovery. The fragments were fusing with Anks's skin. Watching Anx in agony, Cass felt completely lost. She opened the garbage chute, asking neighbors if they had painkillers. But the neighbors were struggling themselves, no one willing to lend a hand. Meanwhile, Mrs. Setsuko upstairs wanted Cass to help find her pet dog. To prevent Anx from turning into a stone figure, Cass forcibly ripped the stones off him. After nearly half a day of cleaning, all the embedded stones were removed from Anx. But he had fallen into a coma. Staring at her boyfriend in the sickbed, Cass could only beg God for a chance. Fortunately, the virus didn't spread further. The injured Anx woke up soon after. After several more days of rest, Anx made a full recovery. Cass started the generator, hoping to see if the CDC had any updates. But when they turned on the radio and TV, all communications were down. Just as Anx was feeling frustrated, a few surveillance clips flashed on the TV. Clearly, even the CDC had fallen. Seeing the footage, both were at a loss. At that moment, Cass heard a strange noise outside the window. She thought it was wind rustling the plastic sheeting, but Cass looked back. There was no wind outside. She moved closer to investigate and realized the sound was coming from the boards they used to seal the window. It turned out Setsuko's pet dog had fused with the wooden boards. Luckily, Anx reacted fast, pulling Cass into the storage room. Yet as soon as they hid inside, the room seemed much smaller. Before Anx could process it, the room began contracting, squeezing them breathless. The neighbor wasn't dead. He had fused with the walls of the room. In panic, Anx grabbed a small knife nearby. Cass looked back and saw an eye emerge on the wall. By the time they escaped the storage room, the boards on the window were gone. Anx then found items to block the storage room entrance, yet the disaster still wasn't over. As the virus kept spreading, Anx's stored food quickly ran out. Luckily, the apartment still had running water. But just as Anx thought about venturing out for food, he noticed small, fleshy growths appearing on Cass's body, her skin starting to take on a wood-like texture. This was the early stage of infection. Looking at Cass in bed, Anx wanted to save her. But the virus spread too rapidly. Anx had no idea how to treat it. In just one afternoon, Cass's condition deteriorated. Anx hid in the bathroom, unsure what to do. At that moment, a voice came from the bathroom's ventilation duct. It was Setsuko upstairs, who had already fused with the sewage system. She told Anx not to struggle, as he too would soon become part of the building. Accepting fusion was better than futile resistance. Hearing Setsuko's warning, Anx stepped outside the bathroom. Cass had now reached the final stage. Her body was fusing with the bedsheet. Looking at Cass on the bed, Anx refused to give up. He grabbed a painkiller injection and scissors, attempting to cut the sheet away, but the sheet was already fused with Cass. Just one cut made Cass bleed profusely. Cass grabbed a pillow to stem the bleeding, but the wound absorbed the pillow instead. Watching Cass suffer, Anx was helpless. He could only watch her fuse with the sheet. Sometime later, Cass was completely consumed by the sheet. Cass urged Anx to flee. Staying in the apartment meant he would melt too. But Anx couldn't bear to leave Cass. Besides, with all humanity fused, where could he even run? As the virus intensified, Cass's fusion accelerated. 2.5 hours later, she had fully transformed into the bedsheet. Suddenly, the apartment began to tremble. Anx looked up and saw the walls contracting, even emitting a heartbeat sound. He went into the hallway only to find it had transformed into an intestinal corridor. Clearly, a neighbor had become the entire apartment complex. Seeing the encroaching intestinal walls, Anx panicked and tried to run, but the whole building was fused. There was nowhere to escape. In despair, Anx spotted a passageway nearby. He tried crawling through it, but it led to a pitch-black void. Anx fell and was knocked unconscious. In his daze, he felt large hands caressing him, surrounded by warm, flowing water. Anx thought he was beginning to fuse too. But then, a woman's voice spoke behind him. He looked up and saw a woman beside him, another survivor from the apartment. She told Anx they were inside the building's digestive tract. To escape, they needed to stimulate the intestinal walls. Hearing her, Anx mimicked her actions, stimulating the walls. Soon, a current of water surged from the surrounding walls. Propelled by the water, they washed out of the intestinal tract. Reaching the street, Anx saw the sky had turned gray, with strange snowflakes falling. He looked back. The apartment was fully transformed into a square, pulsating mass. As Anx stood stunned, a drone appeared beside them. He turned and saw other survivors on the street. It turned out many humans besides Anx hadn't fused. The woman joined the group of survivors, but Anx chose not to leave. He leaned against the fused apartment, utterly bewildered. Unconsciously, Anx fell asleep. In his delirium, he found himself in a bizarre space. He felt his body melting, gradually merging with the void. The instant Anx vanished, the entire Earth began transforming. All matter fused together, becoming a single new life form. That's the full story of the 2025 Belgian disaster horror film, Else. Overall, the film has a touch of depth, especially the ending. Who could have imagined the entire planet becoming a unified entity? So the question is, if such a virus existed, what would you choose to merge with? Alright, that's all for today's share. See you next time.